I still think, it's very commonly asked this question, philosophy 101 question, do we perceive the world in the same way? And as soon as you encounter just one of these illusions and you realize that the answer is not, it does open up the whole spectrum of the question, just how differently do we perceive the world? And I guess part of that is an empirical question, and I put it to you. How differently do people perceive the world? How wide is the gap between, people walking around in the street?
It is an empirical question. It's one we're actually trying to answer right now. There is a long literature on aspects of this. So there's a whole subfield of psychology that studies individual differences in perception. And typically it may look at individual differences in maybe one aspect of perception, like vividness of mental imagery. If people bring something into their mind visually, for some people it's very vivid. For other people it's much more abstract, or there's really nothing going on. We may differ also in, for instance, how we perceive 3 seconds, in how we perceive duration. But not a lot is known about how people differ in sort of lots of different ways all at the same time. Most of the work that's out there is also another aspect of this literature, of this field, has focused more on the extremes too. So there's lots of work on so-called neurodiversity. It's a very, I think, useful concept that first originated as a more of an activist term in the context of autism. So people with autism, it was used to underline the fact that people with autism really experience things very differently. Maybe sensory information seems much more overwhelming often for people with autism. But the term neurodiversity, partly because it was very successful in helping us understand some of these conditions like autism, ironically, I think, reinforced the idea that if you weren't neurodivergent, then you were neurotypical and experienced things as they are. And the dress was a kind of nice wedge into that because it affected everybody. And so this is the real question for me. It's like, not just at the extremes where the differences are large enough that they end up being manifest in differences in behavior, and we might slap a label on them like autism or synesthesia or something else. But what about the differences that are still there, but that we don't recognize because we use the same words and we can get away with it? So it's an empirical question. For the last year and a half, we've been running this experiment called the Perception Census, which is a large-scale attempt to characterize exactly this. What is the diversity out there? We all differ in height and skin color and so on, and we can see that. But what is the wild diversity out there really like? So this experiment's been running for just over a year, and it consists of lots of little, like these examples that you were just showing, really fun little tests and illusions and games, but covering vision, covering sound, covering time, emotion, all sorts of things. And people can basically engage with the senses. All you need is your own computer, and you can do bits at a time, keep coming back. And we're hoping the results from this census, this perception census, will shed light on this diversity in a way that's not been done before. We've already had 30,000 people take part from 100 countries from age of 18 to 80, which is quite a step up from an average psychology experiment. And we are still collecting data. I know it's going to be down to the wire probably by the time people hear our conversation. We're closing data collection at the end of October 2023, so in about 2 weeks from now. So if it's still open when you're listening to this, then please do give it a go, because everyone who takes part really does contribute to our understanding of this phenomenon. We haven't looked at the data yet because we're being good scientists. We want to, not peak before we've got some idea what we're looking for. But I'm very excited about what we'll find.
Yeah, I mean, what do you expect to find? What is the hypothesis?
Well, the overall hypothesis is that there will be quite a lot of differences. To be honest, there's so much data we're collecting. It's going to be more of an exploratory. I feel like it's mapping the territory rather than going in to test any specific hypothesis. There are going to be some things that we'll test. I mean, there are things that we already have hints about from previous experiments, like people differ in their degree of hypnotic suggestibility. Like we're all suggestible to some extent. It's not a bad thing or a good thing. It's just a thing. And we know that differences in suggestibility predict some differences in perception. It's as if you're more suggestible, your perception is more influenced by context. So we can make a lot of specific predictions there. But really what I'm interested in is just what is this distribution like and how does it compare with previous studies, which have generally been more limited in their coverage, in terms of countries and age and so on. So we can ask questions like, does our perception change with age? Does it depend on, which hemisphere you live in, the patterns of daylight that you get, but also what goes along with what? So the idea here is that we might have something like perceptual personalities or perceptual phenotypes that explain how different aspects of our perceptual experience go together. Maybe if you're really sensitive to sounds, maybe you're sensitive to time in a particular way. We don't know yet, but we'll be able to look for these kinds of cross-modal relationships and correlations.